Hey everybody, it's Party Elite, and today we're taking a look at Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2, a new strategy game set in the grimdark future of the Warhammer 40K universe. Focused entirely on interstellar combat, the game is an adaptation of a tabletop wargaming rule set, and it brings to life some epic space battles in multiplayer alongside the continuing story of the universe on which the game is based. Full disclosure, I did receive a review copy of the game from the developers for free, but that obviously has no bearing on my opinions. I also want to mention that if you decide to pick the game up after watching this review, you might be interested in using the Humble Bundle affiliate link I've included in the description down below and under the eye at the top right corner of the screen. Doing so will support charity as well as this channel. Now, without further ado, let's start the review. Is Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2 a gift from the Emperor, or should it be cast aside like some foul heresy? I think it's important to know that my exposure to the first game was actually quite minimal. I only played about 2 hours of it, and so diving into the second game, I had a pretty fresh but pessimistic perspective. I felt the first game was too slow and I couldn't get myself into the action. So I was very pleasantly surprised when I booted up the first and second betas of BFGA 2 and then booted up the review copy, diving right into online ranked battles and somehow just magically sinking several hours into the game. I was immediately hooked. It didn't take me a few hours to get into it. It didn't take me a lot of fiddling before I felt comfortable. It probably helps that I've always found naval tactics to be really interesting, not only from a tactical perspective, but also from a visual perspective, and this game does a great job of putting all of that at the forefront. Epic broadsides being choreographed beautifully, followed by a race to see who can get the next shot off first without crashing into some dangerous obstacle. Massive ship-shattering ramming maneuvers, followed by gorgeous but short-lived explosions and the satisfying bassy boom that accompanies it. Targeting specific parts of enemy ships to systematically destroy them over time. This game delivers it all in fantastic fashion. A big fear with games in the Warhammer 40K universe and license is that they almost always rely on the license. They always rely on the universe to make sales rather than the quality of the game. So I can very happily say that this is clearly not the case here. Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2 is a fun game with robust mechanics first, and the 40K setting is simply used to inform some of the design, visual, and story decisions. The game is primarily focused around multiplayer. The game can be played as ranked battles or as skirmishes versus the AI or friends, and choosing from one of the 12 factions and from one of the multiple sub-factions within those 12 factions, you go up against your opponents in 1v1s or 2v2s, choosing abilities, building a fleet based on a point limit, and otherwise hoping to use the strengths of your faction against the weaknesses of the opponents. The asymmetric design is where the fun lies, but it's also where a lot of the pain is going to lie. Balancing 12 fairly unique factions, each with their own arsenals, each with their own abilities, and each with their own strengths and weaknesses, is no small task. Now, the devs have done a really good job of it so far, though there are cases of over or underpowered matchups. Now, I don't want to dwell too much on this factor, only because it's something that I expect will be getting frequent updates post-release. Once loaded into a game, you deploy your ships within a specified zone and then go to battle. The maps are fairly varied, with obstacles like minefields and asteroids, as well as advantageous ground in the form of gas clouds you can hide ships in. Obstacles can also be used to block lines of fire, so maneuvering around the 2D plane does have some thinking to it, though I'd like to see more variety here if I'm completely honest. I do think it's kinda cool to see that space is being treated like a terrain of sorts. There is not high ground or low ground, but there is, obstacles in terms of visual confirmation, in terms of stealth, so a lot of interesting stuff being done in what would otherwise be a void, basically. Now, winning can be done in two ways. One is completely destroying the enemy fleet, and the other is racking up points to the points limit by capturing certain zones on the map, and by destroying enemy ships to get points equivalent to their buy value. The victory conditions are not two separate modes, they overlap in the single gameplay mode that the game has to offer, and this is something of a divisive factor. Personally, I don't mind the decision. I find the capture points give the maps some flow and direction, and though I haven't seen much of it in the launch maps, it can be used to create choke points and particularly tense zones of battle with some good map design. Now, many prefer playing in a way that simply involves completely destroying the enemy fleet, and I can see the appeal. I'm a little surprised that the two victory conditions aren't separated into three modes: one, the other, and both. Now I imagine it's because they don't want to split a potentially small player base into multiple gameplay modes. That could make matchmaking very slow, and that might result in many people giving up on the game before giving it a chance. Now hopefully modes will be added down the line. I want to see, protect the VIP modes, Annihilation, Domination, King of the Hill. There's all kinds of modes that could be implemented here, so it is a little unfortunate to see just the one, but I do have faith in the developers that they're going to pursue this game, keep updating it, and perhaps bringing in more game modes, more styles of play, more variety of action, basically. Now, controlling your ships is something I consider very easy to learn, but hard to master. They're simple RTS controls for selecting, moving, and shooting. They're really easy to get into, and ship abilities and their effects are very clearly communicated by hovering over UI elements to reveal other UI elements or by reading tooltips. Now, where the difficulty comes to life is in the nuance of each ship. Differing firing angles, different rotation rates, unique abilities or weapons, different amounts of armor in different parts. There are a ton of ways in which the different ships are different, and learning all of this information to take advantage of it can be pretty intricate, though there are some baseline points that are the same across the board, making it easy to get into. This easy to learn but hard to master is, in my opinion, the greatest appeal of a good strategy game. You're not alienated, you don't feel like you don't belong when you first boot up, but if you really want to play with the big boys, you have to practice, you have to learn the intricacies, and you have to take advantage of them. I love that kind of stuff. Now, you'll be organizing broadsides, you'll be focusing down with front-mounted weapons, you're going to set up ramming maneuvers, you're preparing boarding actions, you're launching fighter squadrons if you've got the hangar bays for it, and all of this while considering these angles of fire, your range, your accuracy limitations. What seems like a pretty simple game on the surface really becomes increasingly complex as you dig deeper and deeper, finding the variety of ways in which each of these 12 factions can be maximized, or if you're up against them, minimized, I suppose. Now, you're also able to target enemy ship-specific systems. Now, this is in order to take out various functionalities, and you'll find yourself doing this in order to hamper the strengths of various factions, and also in order to take advantage of the specific fleet you've gone in with. So, it's not all by rote here, either. For example, shoot out the engines of the enemy Necron to prevent them from using their unique teleportation ability. Shoot out the generators of the Drukhari ships to stop their use of stealth. Blow out Tyranid weapons so they can't use their feeding tentacles to eat the crew of your ships, leaving them as empty, drifting hulks. And, should you end up with a drifting hulk, go ahead and use it as a weapon by overloading its reactor, or salvage it by boarding it with your own troops, bringing it back into the fight. What I'm trying to get at here, and maybe I'm rambling a bit, but the sheer amount of systems in place really bring the game to life, and it all adds a challenge that is fun to overcome with time and practice. Now, if this all sounds like too much, there is a degree of automation that the game allows for as well. Using this, you will be relying more on foresight than on micromanagement, so if you just want to assign targets and assign firing angles and kind of let the game play itself with you assisting rather than having to click super fast and pan around super quickly, you can. And you can split the difference and do a bit of both if you'd like, if that's what makes you comfortable. Again, keeping the game approachable, and that's really nicely done. Now, the single-player gameplay involves 3 story-driven campaigns that can also be played in co-op, though that's launching in beta. It's due for a full release sometimes in February. Now, these campaigns will have you leading the Imperium of Man, the Necron, and the Tyranids through the next chapter of the Warhammer 40K universe. The story is well told enough, using in-engine as well as illustrated cutscenes.
If we are to die, let it be with the Emperor's light in our eyes and his fury in our voice. We fight on, all hands. One last effort before they overwhelm us. Make this count!
Admiral, the enemy are paving the way.
No.
And the latter are sometimes a little strangely animated, and the voice acting across the board is acceptable at best, let's put it. There are some examples of some downright bad voice acting, but overall, acceptable.
Mondka, the killing blow brings the enemy's end.
In the campaign mode, you're actually building ships, capturing and managing systems, making persistent upgrades to your fleet, flagships, and admirals. There's a lot more to do, and it's pretty fun trying to deal with the there is only war approach to turn-based campaigning. I enjoyed what I played of the game here, but it it really isn't anything worth writing home about, I suppose. It's not an extraordinary grand strategy experience, but a decent way to play the game, and still fun. I imagine more will be added over time through DLC. With 12 factions worth of models and audio and mechanics already in place, I imagine this post-launch support will continue breathing lots of life into the game, as I said, well after release. Now, in fact, the launch dev post, the developers actually told us that they're already working on the next campaign, and they're adding new ships to the game with the first update to come as well. So that's very promising to see that kind of forward-thinking behavior and talk from the developers on release day, actually. Now, from an audio-visual perspective, the game is quite beautiful. Some of the voice acting, like I said, is pretty bad, but the game is really up there. The lighting is gorgeous. The ships have a fair bit of character and style to them. The gunfire effects are fantastic, and the thumping of gunfire is just as satisfying as the deep, bassy explosions and the sounds of ships crashing into each other. I wouldn't mind seeing some nicer post-processing effects here and there, but at that point, again, I'm seriously just looking for things to point out, and that is really unfair. There's always room for improvement, even in a tech demo, but the fact of the matter is, the artists here, both audio and visual, have done a great job, and I think the game sits in a beautiful spot. It is really captivating sometimes, really distracting sometimes as well, when you just want to zoom in and see a beautiful broadside, or you zoom in and you want to see a nice explosion, and next thing you know, you've been flanked and everything's going to hell, but gorgeous to look at though. Now, my biggest issue with the game probably arises from the multiplayer focus that still seems to lack some key elements. How a game releases in 2019 without built-in replay and spectator mode functionalities blows my mind. If I'm honest, yes, that's coming from a place of bias. I'm a YouTuber, and I'd love to cast battles and tournaments, but I think many people enjoy reviewing past victories and failures to learn from. The bigger surprise is in the lack of game modes. I touched on this earlier. There's easily room for a variety of modes that create interesting scenarios, and I'd love to hear what the plans are for that. Now, that actually applies to single-player mode as well. Having more mission types would just help avoid the repetitive nature of the experience. And finally, while each faction is very different in playstyle, I feel like there is a bit of overlapping in some cases, and more importantly, I'm a little disappointed that the different sub-factions simply amount to different paint jobs, and only some sub-factions are different from each other. That feels like a missed opportunity, as does the lack of an army painter. That should be a given with any game set in the Warhammer universes, fantasy or 40K. And finally, I stand by this for all multiplayer games in this style. The steps of starting a ranked game should be locking in your factions, finding your match, and then selecting your specific fleet and abilities. The way it stands right now, you're always looking to make as generic a fleet as possible, not really considering the specific points of asymmetry between yourself and the enemy. And this is because you can get matched up against any faction with any random fleet. You have no clue what you're up against, so you just make a generic fleet. Now, this leaves less room for creativity in specific matchups, I think, and it sometimes leads to the frustrating scenarios where you just didn't think to bring the one specific thing you needed against the 1 out of 12 factions you just happened to get matched up against this time. Finally, some take issue with the 2D plane of battle in space. I would typically agree. I want my space battles to take place in 3 dimensions, the complexities of battle in space are daunting and exciting, and I want to see them tackled. But as this is an adaptation of a tabletop game fought on a 2D plane, I can see why the devs might want to avoid a conversion into a game with 6 degrees of freedom, keeping it true to its roots. Time for a judgment call. Now, as many of you will already know, I hate numerical scores. I find them random at best, and they bring about arbitrary comparisons between games that can't be compared. Now, what matters more is the gameplay experience and the enjoyment factor of a game. So, is BFGA 2 enjoyable? Oh god, yes. Sure, some of the voice acting is bad. Sure, some of the cutscenes have funky animations with their 2D execution. And sure, there's room for more game modes and some post-launch tweaking. There's always room for more. But by God, the game is a bundle of joy wrapped in a basket of grimdark goodness. The plethora of systems come together nicely in this visually fairly gorgeous game that showcases the universe in such a glorious, massive scale that is both easy to get into and hard to master. Again, a key point of a good strategy game in my opinion. I sunk hours upon hours in-game and spent more time than one should looking at ship stats, trying to come up with different strategies and approaches. The simple gameplay loop just kept me hooked, going in over and over again to keep pitting myself against the enemy. There's also great conversation going on constantly about various approaches to situations, sharing strategies and tactics, sharing number crunching, discussing past battles, and that active community is part and parcel with a game like this. And all of this for less than full price? Absolutely 100% worth it. And if you're still not sure, just check out some of the coverage on the channel. There's a lot of it because I've just been having that much fun with it. Honestly, as I wrote the script for this review and as I'm recording it right now, part of me is like, I kinda wish I was playing instead. Now to clarify, if you're looking for a deep 4X experience or a great grand campaign kind of a deal, this is not the right place to be looking. This game is more about the competitive multiplayer or competitive skirmishing against the AI. If you like managing maneuvers, dealing with firing angles, timing appropriate special abilities, list building, and the allure of space battles, then this will make a fine addition to your collection. I hope you found this review helpful, and I hope it sheds some light on Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2 for you. If you'd like to get more strategy gaming news, previews, reviews, and more, make sure you subscribe to this channel. A massive thanks goes out to all of my channel members and patrons who help keep the channel alive and running smoothly on a monthly basis, and a massive thanks goes out to you for watching. Until next time, cheers.